Hello everyone. So if you followed the last video on AR setup, AR foundation setup, or you followed along in class at least to the point where you got here, then you can continue from here on. So this will be to make a little game or project where you tap on the screen and it'll play something down on the floor in AR, of course, and then you'll be able to look at it by walking around with your phone. So that's pretty cool. We got that far in class on Wednesday, so that's why I wanted to just make a video so that if anyone's lost, they can follow along. So at this point, we have a AR default point cloud, which is just a particle system with some scripts to map whatever the origin session or session origin sees. But what we want to do now is we want to disable this AR point cloud manager because we don't actually need the point cloud manager necessarily. Um, I think it's just built in. This is just to expose the cloud data basically, but we're not going to use it anyway for what we want to do. I'm just going to put this here because it doesn't matter. You can't see that anyway. Cool. All right, so the first thing you have to do is to, of course, build your game and make sure it works. Most of yours should work. It should just like at this point, if this is on, it should have a camera feed, and you should have yellow dots wherever it detects like flat surfaces. So the next thing we have to do is we're going to switch over to something called a plane manager rather than a point cloud. So if the right click, again to go to XR and click on AR default plane. So this maps differently. It's a similar thing where it's like mapping the floor, but instead of just projecting dots, it'll actually make a plane that we can interact with. So that's very important. All right, cool. And then of course you have to reference it in the AR session origin, otherwise it doesn't know it exists. So I'm just gonna go and type in plane, and then you'll find AR plane manager. Pretty easy. And then remember to drag in the AR default plane into the plane prefab slot. It doesn't make that much sense because it's not a prefab, it's just a normal thing in the scene, but it's fine. Everything's good. You'll also see you have these options to say, I only want horizontal surfaces or vertical, so just the floor walls. Just keep it on everything, that's fine. All right, cool. And that's what we need for the initial setup. Now we can actually make a script that does something. So in our scripts folder, go to create script, and I'm just going to call this AR. So you always want to start AR related scripts with AR. So if it doesn't feature anything with the AR setup or anything, it's just like a communication script or a manager, then you don't really need AR in front, I guess, but it's your choice. So AR tap to place. This is what the script is going to do. So we're going to tap to place. And the reason we're doing this is because this is the foundation of how this works. Because you could either tap to place something, or you could change it so that it's always detecting the floor. And then it will like place your objects based on what it can see, or I don't know. I don't have a clear idea in my head right now, so it's hard to describe. But you can take this logic and do anything of it, basically. So just gonna delete these two. I don't like it. Windows are there. The default ones, so like a default cube in Blender. So the first thing we have to do is we have to access AR Foundation and its subsystems, and that's pretty easy. That's just using Unity Engine. That's the wrong one. My mic's in the way. Hang on. I'm just moving you guys, a little bit to the side. Unity Engine .ar Foundation. I'm wrong. It's xr.ar Foundation. Of course, I have to make it more complicated. Cool. I'm just gonna duplicate it. Oof. Don't try to save it. Press the wrong button. And then it's AR subsystem. So it's Unity Engine.xr.ar. Well, you can see it on the screen. It's fine. Those two we need to access the things you want to do. All right, cool. And then the next thing we need, we don't technically need it, right? But it makes life easier if you put it in. And then you can also see that it exists, and you can do it for other stuff. So let's type it. It's you do above the class 2 square brackets, and then you do require component. So you can basically say this script needs a rigid body. So if your player doesn't have a rigid body, it'll then force it to have one on, and then you can probably set it up in a wake or start, like set up that rigid body that it spawned in. So that's pretty cool. So we're gonna type then type of. We need brackets, of course, and the type is AR Raycast Manager. So a different way of doing this would be to just drop this AR Raycast Manager script into the session origin and then just reference it. But I mean, this is fine. This works just as good. Doesn't matter too much. And then we're going to just add some variables. So the first one is, so I'm going to use serialized field. It's basically update, but it's private. So it's not accessible by other scripts, but it is accessible in the editor. All right, so serialized field, game object, well, let's say spawn prefab, and that's the prefab we're going to spawn into the world, of course. And then we need a vector2 for the touch position. We're storing the touch position. You technically don't need to do that because you basically tap again and then you just have that new position as the position, but it's fine. Then next we need an AR Raycast Manager reference. And I don't like the way they spell it or like type it out. I want, because AR is technically like one thing, so I'm just doing both lowercase. All right, cool. The next thing is we need a list. So we're just gonna make it serialized field. Wait, no, you don't need to. AO raycast hit. So raycast hit is this is like a different version of raycasting that works differently from normal raycasting, and that's because it has to interact with like the plane manager and so on, like the AR's backend stuff. So without this, it wouldn't really work the same because you would have to manually detect like planes and so on through a script, whereas this just does it. It just detects them. But I'm sure you could do this manually if you really want to hurt yourself and not hurt yourself, but you know, waste time. But yeah, so the AR raycast hit, I typed it wrong. This is supposed to be a list. Sorry about that. I'm just rushing into things. There you go. And then we could just call it like hits. You could call it like hit lists. Anyway, I'm diverging now. But I like to do it just plural. Hits equals new. I have auto type, so that's very nice and fantastic. And those are all the variables we need. Actually, I'm missing one. No, we're storing the spawned object as well. So we need a game object spawned go. Guess that's fine. Cool. And then the next thing we need to do is to set up our Raycast manager, because right now it doesn't know what it is. So just AR Raycast manager equals get component AR Raycast manager. Pretty simple. Sorry if I'm going too slow. I like to over-explain stuff that doesn't need over-explaining. Cool. And then from now on, everything will happen in update. So that's cool. All right, so the first thing you have to do is we have to work with touch input, which I don't think you guys have worked with before, but it's not that complex. So you just have to say if input dot touch count. So this will detect how many touches are on the screen. Is bigger than 0, because of course you can have more than one thing on the screen. Then you're gonna say touch. So you're basically storing the touch information equals input dot get touch. And then we can just say the first touch by providing a 0 right there. Pretty simple. Cool. And then next up, we have to do something with that touch variable we just created. So we stored it into touch and now we have to do something with it. So we can say if touch dot phase, how dare you misspell, touch dot phase equals touch phase dot began. So if the touch phase is you touch down, with this you can do began. So when you touched it, cancelled. Oh, I got the one that was very useful. Cancelled when you lift up your finger, or ended. I can't remember which one is which. There's also moved. But you wouldn't really use moved for dragging if you wanted to do that. That would just be like a different setup, which I can show at some other point if you guys are really interested. Or you can just check out tutorials. It's not that bad. All right, and the next thing you have to do is now you have this touch information. Right, touch stores all the information of the touch, the location, the phase of it, and so on, like we see here. So we can now say touch position. So we're storing touch position here. Touch position equals touch dot position. Simple. And I just want to quickly explain this logic here because I'm sure you guys understand it, or if you don't, it doesn't really matter because, it just works. But what this basically is an enum. So phase is a variable of an enum stored in touch, and touch phase is the enum itself. So an example would be, so I'm just making a brand new one. Don't copy this. We're not going to use it, so there won't be a point in copying it. So public enum, and it's called touch or like slice phase. There's no reason in rhyme as to why I chose that word. Don't worry about it. So we could, for example, that one has dot began, so maybe we can have slice. I like to do capital letters, but it doesn't really matter. Slice, end, slice, whichever, right? And then this touch dot phase is basically like making a new class, which you can just do right here. Public class, and we can just call this slice because I mean we're going off the theme here. Cool, I have a class, and in here we can now have a slice phase variable. So public slice phase. Cool. So we could just as well here say if, I guess we would have to make a variable as well, right? So it would be slice, or it would just actually be, oh, it's slice, yes. So slice, slice, you would have to store it. I'm just making it. It's fine. And then I can just say slice dot slice phase equals slice phase dot slice. So you can see it's exactly the same thing. It has an error because it's not assigned and it's local, but so it's basically just there's an enum and they're doing something with it and it's exposed. Anyway, sorry if you already knew that, and I'm just rambling on with something that doesn't matter. But if you were wondering like what is this exactly or why, that's what it is. Cool. Anyway, diversion done. So the next thing we have to do is, so we found the touch position, now we can do something with it. The next thing we have to do is we have to try and see if it actually hits something important, AR related. So we're gonna say if AR raycast manager, our variable, dot raycast, cool. So we're using its raycast, which has less parameters. And then we can say touch position for the position. So if I hover over it, you can see it says you need a screen point specifically, which is touch position, of course. And then we need a list of raycast hit results, and then the trackable type. So it's pretty simple. Cool. So the next thing you need in here is hits. I'm just going to copy it from here. And then the last thing is the type, which is also an enum. So trackable type dot, you get all these options here. In class we used all, but apparently all is being deprecated. So just use all types. So this will be, plane within bounds, within polygon. For me, for now, just for us to get this working, I think plane should work. But all types will detect point clouds and the new plane that you made from your phone and so on. And just take that into account. When you're playing the game and you're clicking and it doesn't want to like place your object. That might be because you don't have a plane on your floor yet. So just move your phone around and you'll see like these black lines form, and it will look like it's mapping that shape onto the ground, and then you can tap on it. Just keep that in mind, because I myself have had that issue where I was testing something and iterating through it, and it wouldn't work because I didn't actually spend time moving the phone to map it out. That's something you can resolve by making UI that says move your phone around to make a floor plane, and then once it has a floor plane, it can give feedback to your script to remove the UI. That's one thing we could also look at some point. That's very cool. But anyway, let me not divert any more than I need to, um, which is already too much. Cool. But we're almost done. Don't worry about it. Alright, the next thing we need now is to store these hits and use it. So pose, hit pose equals to hits 0. So the first hit, it's similar to with the touch phase. Not really. I'll explain now what it is. Dot pose, that's how you end it up. So what this is you might have more than one plane on your floor. Depending on how it maps and what the camera sees, it might have two overlapping ones. Or you might have a plane on a table and then one on the ground below it. And so you don't want it to tap on the last layer, which would be the ground. If you're looking, or like, your camera's above the table, you want it to be on the table. And that would be the very first hit. So that's all we're doing here. It's pretty simple. Next up is just, we now have the position, so we can actually spawn something. So let's say if, I forgot what it's called, spawn go. So if spawn go equals null, which technically you could shorten it by just doing that. But it's fine. This is more descriptive, so it's fine. If spawn object is null, so not instantiated, then we're going to instantiate it. So spawn go equals instantiate. And then the position is... Why am I so confused now? Prefab. Oh, yeah, the first thing is... I have to read. It's the spawn prefab. And then it's the position. So for our position, we're just going to use hit pose dot position and hit pose dot rotation. Cool. And that should be it. Cool. For this line. And then next up, so if you try to tap again, it will not work because it's null, or it's not null anymore. So now we could just say else, if it is in the world, we can just move it. So spawn prefab, well, spawn go dot position, transform dot position equals hit pose dot position. All right, that's it. Like that's the whole script. We'll set it up now, and it's pretty simple to do. But yeah, so it seems complicated, but all this is we're trying to, through touch here, trying to figure out like where do you touch when it comes to the screen space, not in the world first. So this is screen space input and storage for the variable. And then we're trying to actually raycast in the 3D scene, in the AR 3D scene, and we're storing that information of the first hit in hitpose. And then we're instantiating it using that position that we got, which is the position, of course, in the AR world. So it would be like the floor in the real world, but it's actually just a plane on the floor. So it's not that complicated. It's just a lot to write down to get it to work. But it's like any other game after this. It's not that bad. It's fine. So an example would be, okay, let's set it up first and I'll give you an example. Something I did and I'll show you guys in class, which is pretty cool. But yeah, let's set it up. So in the AR session origin, this is where we need to put it, because this is where all the action happens, right? So just drag it onto here and you'll see it automatically makes an AR raycast manager. So for now, or not for now, in general, don't like put something in the raycast prefab. You might think, let me put something in there. Let me put the plane or the prefab or whatever, but no, it's fine. You can just keep it empty. If you hover over, it says if not null instantiates this prefab for each raycast. So if it is null, it's not gonna instantiate anything. And that's what we want. We don't want to instantiate anything. So cool. Let's now actually, so that's the setup. It exists and it will work. We just have to put an object in there to spawn. So let's go to prefab. So I have this ugly cube. I'm gonna make a new thingy mabob. Maybe a cylinder spawn object. Can be called anything. I don't know why I called it that, but it's fine. And I'm gonna, you can keep on colliders, but I'm just gonna remove it. But you can keep it on if that's your thing. And just keep in mind that this is real world size. So if this says it's a meter by meter, in real world, it'll be a meter by meter, which is gigantic. Yeah, so maybe like 0.6 by 0.05, that's 5 centimeters, I think. Yeah. And then 0.6. So this is 60 centimeters by 60 centimeters by 5 centimeters, I guess. Right? Am I assuming correct? Maths? That seems very thick for like 5 centimeters. But anyway, yeah. So now I have this spawn object. I'm just gonna make a material for it because that's ugly. Material spawn object match. I didn't. Why did I do this? Folder. Materials. Organization. Important. Cool. Drag it on there. Do that. Maybe the color can be like. I'll go like a peachy color. Why not? That's not really peachy, but it's fine. It's more orange, just orange. Alright, cool. So now we have this object here. Go to prefabs and drag it in. Cool. So we can delete it in the scene because we don't need it anymore. We have it as a prefab. So let's go to our session origin and now drag it into our AR tab to place spawn prefab slot. I'm ever explaining it, but I just don't want you guys to drag it in here or anything like that because, I mean, I don't think it will break, but you don't want that. So that's the setup. From here, you can build and make sure it doesn't have any build errors. So I'll do that as well. I hope it doesn't build for too long. But remember to be switched to Android platform. Follow the other video to set up your stuff to make sure that it is set up correctly. And then just build. So let's go. Oh, this is the correct folder. AR point cloud test. Let me make it AR spawn object. Sure, it's fine. So an example of something you could do, right? That spawn object can be anything. I made a box, then I made it flat. I gave it walls, and I put a car inside of it. So the prefab has a hierarchy of like an empty, and below it it's like the track itself or the floor, and then another empty separate. But in that, why am I explaining it so weird? Whatever. It's a prefab that includes inside of it car with car physics and script and a floor to ride on. So you can make like an entire mini game in just the object you spawn, like the one prefab. And I literally could spawn it and drive around on it, which is pretty cool. So you guys can probably do something similar where you're spawning a, let's say a forest, a small forest, or just a plane as well, and then put a player controller on it or inside of that prefab that has no camera, of course, and then you can like walk around with it in the scene, which is pretty cool. Or it's just on that plane, I guess. I haven't tested if it will work on the plane, like the airplane. I don't think it has a collider, so I don't think it will work. But yeah, very cool stuff. All right, mine finished building is right here. So cool, no errors at all, just 300 seconds. I want to show you guys one more thing, right? And that's because you might start like if you're curious about this, you might start building something, and you're like, how do I do touch inputs? Apart from buttons. Uh, and I mean, you could do buttons, but that's kind of boring. So what you do is, let me just wait for it to load. It's gonna take a while. And I'm just doing it in my asset, so you won't have this. You can just go to the Unity asset store and get this package. So it's called, just Joystick is what I'm gonna type in, see what I get again. I've used this a lot. I was exposed to this at a job, actually, where that's all they use. So if you're in the asset store, cool. So this is how it looks like. It has this green thing. It looks kind of dodgy, but it works really well. So just gonna download it. Come on, download, resume. Why is it so slow? There we go. And then import. You can see it has 4 types: dynamic joystick, floating joystick, then normal joystick, and then a variable joystick. I only use the floating joystick or the normal joystick. It's your choice. And the cool thing is this works in the editor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dock the game view to the side. And what you can do is you can click on simulator. And I like to do something like the Samsung Galaxy Note 20 Ultra because that's the closest to the aspect ratios we have these days. I think if you don't have this, it's a package called like device simulator or mobile simulator. But anyway, now we have that. So let's go to joystick pack. Then there's documentation that explains it slightly, but it doesn't really show you how to implement it. So let me show you. I'm just going to do some quick code, right? So floating joystick, this is my favorite. And then there's a fixed joystick. So fixed joystick will, okay, I could just show the two. These are the two I use, floating and so on. And I'll show you how to access them through code as well. So this means you don't have to set up anything. You could just use this and then you'll have like joystick input. You'll just have to do buttons as well, of course. So what you do is it won't work by itself because you need a canvas, a UI canvas, and then I will name this something like joystick canvas because you want to separate your canvases so that one canvas might be for stuff that moves around a lot, while the other might be for static menu items. Because if it updates over and over again and you have a lot of UI, then you're updating everything for no reason. So just let's do with the canvas a normal setup. You can just do scale of screen size, and then bear in mind this is a phone, so to do 1080 by 2400, which is like modern phone aspect ratios. You can do 1920 if you want. And then this can be a matter of width because it's a phone. I mean, I guess height can work. You can play around with it. But that's fine. That's all we need. Or that should be it. Yeah, I think that's fine. All right, cool. And then all we do is we drag these two into the joystick canvas here. So, I'm just gonna disable this one. There's a little bit of a setup you actually do need with these. Let me see quickly. All right, so I'm just gonna focus on one of them first. So, for example, this one, its width and height doesn't match. You can see the screen is this massive. So if I play now, you'll see that this floating joystick works wonders. It's gone, and then if you click, it appears, and then you can move it around, right? So it'll pop up whenever you click. But if you click here, it won't work. So it's just because it's not fitting the size of the screen. So you can just do this, but then it also won't really fit the screen. So what you want to do is you see this scale here. For some reason, they shipped it scaled. And then you can just zero out all of this. And then boom, it's matching the screen exactly. So now, and I know that's a stupid thing, like why is it set up like that? But it's kind of fine. So now you can click anywhere and drag, right? Cool. And so let's disable it. And then the fixed joystick is not exactly the same. It's smaller because it's just fixed. So this one you could probably just put like there, and it's always at one fixed point. So it won't disappear. It'll just be there, and you can just, move it around. But you can see that's weird because it's a phone. It doesn't like that's why I don't like using this one. There's also one called the dynamic joystick. So dynamic, right? And this is like the floating, but it actually moves around with your finger. So if I do the setup again, which I have to match up the screen, then set them all to 0. Here we go. This one didn't scale weirdly. Cool, but this one should also disappear. And then you can click and drag, and you'll see it drags around. So if you're someone who's like heavy on the game, and you keep going left, 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 then it'll just follow along. So very nice. You can change the background of these as well. So, but my favorite still is the floating joystick. I don't know. It just works really nicely. So what you can do is you have the background and the handle. So you literally just change like the background. You can change the size of it if you want to. You can change the color or the transparency. And then the same thing with the handle. The middle bit, you can also change, of course, its size, or you can disable it completely. Well, don't disable it, I guess, just disable the image. And you can also change its color, stuff like that. So yeah, so that's a joystick. It's very cool. So if we go to our arrow tap to place, let's say here, for example, I want to use that now. So here's the thing, right? You might think, wait, let me think. I think something broke yesterday, and that's why I'm talking about this. All right, so the prefab, right? This one here. If you make a script for it, right? Maybe in here there's a player controller script that can stand on this thingamabob, right? And you're trying to reference the floating joystick through a normal, serialized field of public reference. It won't work because it exists here, right? It doesn't exist in the scene. So the best way I would say to do this is to either make like a AR manager here, or to just use your tap to place. I guess that's also fine. So what you would do then is you would say serialized field and then floating joystick, and then just call it floating joystick. So now you can drop it in, right? Let's go back. Sorry, this is becoming like a really long recording for no reason. But this is cool. So then just drag it in. It has to be the specific one. So if you want a fixed joystick, you'll see it has a script called fixed joystick. So then you would have to type in here fixed joystick. All right, cool. So now we have a reference to it in something that always persists in the scene, which is the session origin. And so now what you can do is, let's say you have a player. So let's make a player script, like a mock-up player script. So just player mock, right? And I want to give you guys this so that you have the tool set to do stuff and not be held back, right? So in here now, what we can do, let's say we have, here's input and here's setup, and you also have like fixed update, that's like the movement or whatever, right? What you do is you make or you expose this class, this player mock. So that's assuming there's only one player. If you have more than one, you'll do it slightly different. But there's still a way to do this. You can be creative and figure it out for yourself, or I can show you at some other point if you're stuck. So public static player mock, well, instance. The reason you're doing instance is so that whenever you're referencing anything and you're trying to find it, you can just do instance instead of having to faff around with the name. Awake. So you want to always do this in awake. You say instance equals this, right? And let's say in here we now have a public or whatever. Let's do it the actual good way. So we have a floating joystick called floating joystick. No. And we want to set this up, right? So we want the floating joystick so we can get the inputs, okay? And so the way we do that is, in the best way possible, is to do a public void. So you never want to do an instance reference and then just set the variable directly. I'll show you that now as well, maybe. It's better to just have a function and call that. So we can just say set floating joystick, and that would be floating joystick, and then floating joystick. I like to do underscores here. And so in here you can say floating joystick, which is our floating joystick, equals floating joystick. And that's why I do an underscore. Now I can see what is what, although my theme does show that clearly. Cool. So this is one way of doing it. So in here we add the actual floating joystick reference. We don't have it here because this player is on the prefab, it gets instantiated, so it can't be set there. So now what we can do is we can go to start, for example. You don't want to do this in awake necessarily, but yeah. So now we can say player mock dot instance dot let's see, set, I think. Set floating joystick, yes. And then you can just put that in there. And if you want to make sure that this won't give errors and you want to be pedantic, you can say if floating joystick is not equal to null, then do that. So if it's not input there, then it will just not assign it. Pretty simple stuff. So the bad way of doing this would be to make this public, and then to say player mock dot instance dot variable equals floating stick joystick. And you can do that. Okay, I'm not gonna say let your creative juices die here, but it doesn't look professional. It's not the industry standard. It's not as readable. This literally says set floating joystick, and right here it might not be that, like, it doesn't matter because this also kind of gives that information or conveys that, but it might be, you might have something that's a bit more complicated, and then you're just looking at the screen like, why am I setting 5 variables? Like, I mean, you can just do this with like 5 variables here or whatever, and then on this side you can set the variables in this script, and then the calling is just one line, right? That's one reason why we do it that way. But cool, that's one way of doing it, right? But I don't have a player mock script in my scene. So this will not run. But this is just if you have a player or a car or whatever, right? So to access it, I'll show it on both sides so you guys have like a visual representation of it, so it doesn't become confusing. So now this floating joystick, what we can do is something very boring, and that is to log it out. So log with a $sign, we say floating joystick input is floating joystick dot. So you have 3 options here. You have the direction, and then you have horizontal and vertical. So I'm just gonna say direction. So direction is a vector2. Let's see, vector2. So vector direction will just be, the null vector2 for x and y, whereas horizontal and vertical will be the individual axes. So you have control over that. You can also use this in some weird ways to like detect tap input, I guess, but that's pretty weird. And you might. Okay, let me just do this. Let me just do this. So we already assigned it. So I'm just gonna, use it. So you can see there was an error, but ignored. It's fine. Don't worry about it. So yeah, it works. If I go up, the y is up. X is minus, and so on. So it works. And if I tap anywhere on the screen, it'll just work. So that's how you set this up, guys. Now you have a joystick to do cool stuff with. That error, let's actually see what it is. If floating joystick, oh, I'm sorry. This is supposed to be if it is null. No, wait, that's not right. Why is this? Why did it complain? It's not supposed to run this at all, because this is saying if floating joystick is not equal to null. Oh, I still assigned it, but this doesn't exist. So I'm just going to do this for now. But how you would do it on this side is exactly the same. So floating joystick, and let's say you have player input here. A normal way to do it would be something like you have a vector2 for player raw input. That's just literally input. And then you could in update say player raw input equals floating joystick dot direction, right? And then you could have like another variable that's like player norm input. I think these are already normalized though, so don't worry about it. But you could do like this equals this dot normalized or whatever, but it doesn't really matter. There you go. Now you have directional input for a joystick that you don't have to set up. Just one thing to keep in mind: if you want UI on the screen to work, apart from this, I can show you quickly. So UI button. Sorry, there's music playing. It's not that big of a deal. So width, height. So something you'll notice is if I try to click this button, it will not click it. Oh, it does click it. Okay, but if it doesn't click it, then the floating joystick has something here has a different value. Oh, yeah, you would just put this in a different canvas, and then you can adjust the sort order. So just, sorry, I got confused there for a moment. If it doesn't want to click, then put it in a different canvas. You should anyway put buttons in a separate canvas. And then you can go to the canvas and set the sort order higher, and it should be fine. And also, if you want to interact through the raycasting, right? So we have this raycast tap to play string now. If you want to do that, it's not going to allow you because of this button. Or it might do it, but it'll still have this button. So just, you have a reference to it here. So you can, for example, say, you can have like I'm not going to code it now, but you can have like a bool and then have a button here. So if you click the button, it will like allow to move the joystick, and that's fine. And then you just disable the placing of the bool. And the other way around, if you click again that button, let's say it's this button, then the joystick here should be disabled so that you can actually click on the screen and tap to place the object. All right, but that's the entire video, and hopefully the joystick thing really helped you guys at some point. But yeah, cool.